This weekend in England and Scotland is going to bring something different from typical winter weather. Not just a Saturday and Sunday event, but conditions with effects that stretch into Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and possibly beyond. 16 counties across the United Kingdom are about to experience a weather pattern that doesn't occur often, a storm where the snowfall itself is just the beginning, and the recovery period is what really shapes the week ahead. But here's what makes this different from every winter weather system you've seen roll through Britain in recent years. This one doesn't just arrive and leave. This system is expected to move slowly and affect the region over 48 hours. We're talking about a weather event that will affect millions of people across 16 counties, bringing significant snow to communities that won't melt quickly, won't disappear overnight, and won't fade into memory as just another winter inconvenience. Stay with me for the next several minutes. In this video, we'll examine current weather forecasts and what they indicate for this weekend. In this video, we're going to answer one crucial question. Why is this storm forming now? Why will it last so long? And what makes it capable of creating significant disruption that extends well beyond the snowfall itself? This is a notable weather event worth understanding. Current forecasts suggest it will affect travel and daily activities across a large area. What's coming this weekend falls firmly into that second category. So let me paint the picture for you. Right now, as you're watching this video, weather systems are already positioning themselves over the Atlantic. Warm air is pushing up from the south, cold air is descending from the north, and somewhere over Britain, these two air masses are expected to meet, potentially creating sustained snowfall over 2 days. Now, I want you to think about what that really means. Not a snow shower that passes through in an hour, not a brief flurry that dusts the ground and melts by afternoon. We're talking about continuous snowfall that begins on one day and doesn't stop until the next. A slow-moving system that produces steady snowfall over an extended period, while people sleep and wake and go about their lives. Weather forecasting services show this pattern developing across current models. The active snowfall is forecast to last 2 days. However, recovery and cleanup efforts will continue for several days after that. That's the part most weather reports gloss over. They tell you when the snow starts and when it stops, and then they move on to the next story. But anyone who's lived through a major winter storm knows the truth. The snow stopping doesn't mean life goes back to normal. It means the second phase begins, and that's exactly what we're going to explore together. Not just the storm, but the story of what happens before, during, and after. Because if you're someone who values being informed, who appreciates understanding the full picture, who wants to know not just what's coming but why it matters, then you're in the right place. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from. Are you in the path of this storm? Are you in one of those 16 counties that's about to see significant snowfall? Or are you watching from somewhere else entirely, curious about what's unfolding across the UK? I read every comment, and I'm genuinely curious to know where this video is reaching. Plus, it helps me understand who's directly affected and who's watching out of interest in weather systems like this. Now, let's get into it. Let's talk about what makes this weekend different. Let's break down the mechanics of how a rainstorm transforms into a blizzard. Let's map out exactly where this system's going to hit, and why certain regions are going to see the heaviest accumulation. And most importantly, let's talk about what happens in the days after the snow stops falling, because that's when the real challenge begins. You might be wondering why I'm spending so much time setting this up. Why not just jump straight into the forecast? Here's why. Because understanding weather isn't just about knowing what's going to happen. It's about understanding the why behind it. It's about seeing the bigger picture. And when you understand that bigger picture, you're not just informed, you're prepared. Not in a panicked way, but in a calm, thoughtful way that comes from actually knowing what you're dealing with. So that's what we're going to do together. We're going to walk through this storm from beginning to end. We're going to make sense of the meteorology without drowning in technical jargon. We're going to map the geography without getting lost in county-by-county details. And we're going to talk about the aftermath without falling into generic winter weather cliches. Because this storm deserves that level of attention, and you deserve that level of explanation. So let's begin where all good weather stories begin, with the forecast itself. The weather maps are showing something that doesn't happen often. A 2-day snowstorm is forecast to move across England starting this weekend, and when I say 2 days, I mean continuous snowfall across a massive geographic area. This isn't a system that moves quickly through, drops a bit of snow and moves away. This is a slow-moving, persistent storm that sets up over the country and stays there. Let me walk you through the timeline, because timing is everything with a storm like this. Saturday starts out relatively normal for mid-February. You might see some rain moving in from the west as the day progresses. Nothing unusual about that. Britain knows rain. Rain is common in Britain, but Saturday night is when the transformation begins. As we move into the overnight hours, temperatures start to drop. That rain you saw during the day, it's still there. The moisture is still in the atmosphere. The clouds are still heavy with precipitation, but now that precipitation meets colder air, which can change rain to snow. Sunday morning, people across 16 counties may wake up to significant snow coverage. The rain from Saturday has turned to snow, and it's not stopping. It's falling steadily and accumulating. Roads, fields, rooftops, and gardens receive snow coverage. Now 16 counties is a lot of ground to cover. We're talking about a corridor that stretches from parts of Scotland down through England, affecting millions of people in the process. Millions of people waking up Sunday morning to the same weather event happening simultaneously across a huge swath of the country. This indicates the storm's broad scope. The storm is forecast to affect both urban areas and rural communities. Cities that regularly manage winter weather will be dealing with sustained snowfall. Smaller towns with less snow-clearing infrastructure may face challenges managing the accumulation, and many areas face similar conditions. And here's what makes this particularly challenging. The snow doesn't stop Sunday afternoon. It doesn't taper off Sunday evening. It keeps going. Sunday night into Monday, the snowfall continues. This distinguishes a major winter storm from a minor inconvenience. A minor inconvenience gives you a few inches and moves on. A major storm keeps adding to the total, hour after hour, until you're dealing with accumulations measured in multiple inches, possibly up to 10 centimetres in some areas, though amounts may vary. 10 centimetres might not sound like an enormous amount if you're used to massive snowstorms in other parts of the world. But in the UK, where infrastructure isn't designed for sustained heavy snowfall, where many communities don't regularly deal with this kind of winter weather, 10 centimetres is significant. It's significant because of the way it falls, continuously, persistently, without break, and because of how long it stays. The weather maps are particularly striking when you look at them. You can see the system positioned right over England, this massive area of precipitation locked in place by the atmospheric conditions around it. It's not moving east quickly. It's not sliding south and out to sea. It moves slowly across the region, producing widespread snow. This is what meteorologists mean when they talk about a setup. Everything has to align just right for a storm like this to happen. Moisture comes from warmer southern air, while cold air moves in from the north. And you need those two air masses to meet in just the right way, at just the right time, over just the right location. When all those pieces come together, you get what we're about to see this weekend. Current forecasts show good model agreement. While weather can change, the pattern looks increasingly likely. Forecasters are still working out specific snowfall amounts and timing for each area, but the overall pattern appears consistent across models. Think about what this means for the weekend ahead. Sunday, which might have been a day for errands or visiting family or just relaxing at home, becomes a day of watching snow accumulate outside your window. Monday, which was supposed to be the start of a normal work week, becomes something else entirely. And the ripple effects from those 2 days? They extend much further than just Sunday and Monday, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we talk about impacts and aftermath, we need to understand something fundamental. How does this actually happen? How does rain become snow? How does a regular weather system transform into a 2-day blizzard? Because once you understand the mechanics, everything else makes perfect sense. The answer lies not in complicated meteorological theory, but in something quite simple, the meeting of two very different air masses over Britain, and that's exactly where we're going next. We're going to break down the science of this storm in a way that doesn't require a degree in atmospheric physics. We're going to make sense of why this weekend, why this way, and why this particular setup creates such a persistent system. Because understanding the how and why of this storm is the key to understanding everything that follows. Let me explain how a major snowstorm actually forms, because once you understand this, everything about this weekend makes sense. The science can be explained simply, no jargon, no technical terms that require a dictionary. Just a straightforward explanation of what happens when two different kinds of air meet over Britain. Start with this image, warm air moving north. This air has been sitting over relatively warmer regions to the south, picking up moisture as it travels. This air mass absorbs moisture as it travels. By the time this air mass reaches Britain, it's loaded with moisture. It contains significant moisture, and when air that's heavy with moisture needs to release that moisture, it does so in the form of precipitation. Rain. That's the first part of the equation. Warm, moist air bringing rain. Nothing unusual about that. Britain sees this kind of weather system regularly. It's the reason umbrellas are a national accessory. But here's where things get interesting. Now picture cold air moving south. This air has a completely different personality. It's been sitting over colder regions to the north, and it carries that cold with it as it travels. When I say cold, I mean very cold. The kind of cold that changes the rules of what happens when moisture falls from the sky. This cold air is denser, heavier, and it sinks down to the surface where people actually live and experience weather. So we have two air masses heading toward each other, warm and moist from the south, cold and dense from the north, and Britain sits right in the middle of where these two systems are going to meet. That's the setup. That's the stage being set for this weekend. Here's what happens when they collide. The warm air, being lighter, tries to rise up over the cold air, but it can't just float away because the cold air is pushing against it, creating resistance. So the warm air is forced upward, and as it rises, it cools. And here's the critical part. When warm, moist air rises and cools, that moisture has to go somewhere. It condenses, it forms clouds, it creates precipitation. Under normal circumstances, that precipitation would fall as rain because the air closer to the ground is warm enough to keep it liquid. But that's not what we have this weekend. We have cold air at the surface. Really cold air. So when that precipitation falls from the clouds above, it's falling through air that's cold enough to transform it. Rain becomes snow. It's that simple and that profound. Water droplets falling through air cold enough to freeze them turn into snowflakes. And once that transformation happens, once rain becomes snow, everything changes. Snow accumulates in a way rain doesn't. Snow accumulates and creates visible coverage. But here's what makes this particular storm different from a quick snow shower. The cold air at the surface isn't just passing through for an hour or two, it's settling in, it's sticking around. And as long as that cold air remains in place near the ground, every bit of moisture that falls from those clouds is going to fall as snow. Meanwhile, that warm air above keeps being pushed upward by the cold air below, and that warm air keeps cooling as it rises, and that cooling keeps producing more precipitation. The cycle feeds itself. More moisture rises, more precipitation forms, more snow falls, hour after hour, through Saturday night, through all of Sunday, into Sunday night and Monday morning. This is what meteorologists mean when they talk about a persistent system. It's not that the storm itself is moving slowly, though it is. It's that the atmospheric conditions supporting the storm remain locked in place. The cold air at the surface doesn't warm up quickly. The warm air above keeps feeding moisture into the system, and the result is continuous snowfall across a huge area for an extended period of time. Think about what this means in practical terms. If you get a quick burst of snow that lasts an hour, you might see a light coating, maybe an inch if it's falling heavily. But when snow falls continuously for hours and hours, when it falls through Saturday night and all day Sunday and into Monday, the accumulation adds up. A little bit every hour becomes several inches by the time it's done. That's how you end up with up to 10 centimetres in the hardest hit areas. The temperature is the key to all of this. If the cold air wasn't there, this would just be a rainy weekend. Unpleasant maybe, but manageable. Britain handles rain without much trouble, but add that cold air into the equation, drop the temperature just enough to turn rain into snow, and suddenly you're dealing with something entirely different. You're dealing with accumulation. You're dealing with whiteout conditions in heavier bands of snowfall. You're dealing with a landscape that transforms in real time. There's another element to this that's worth understanding. This cold air isn't just barely cold enough to create snow. It's cold enough to keep that snow from melting quickly once it hits the ground. When snow falls onto pavement or grass that's just barely below freezing, it might melt on contact or soon after. But when that surface is well below freezing because cold air has been sitting there for hours, the snow sticks, it stays, it accumulates. That's the setup Britain is facing this weekend. Cold air moving in and settling down, warm moist air rising above it and producing continuous precipitation, and that precipitation falling as snow because the temperature at the surface is cold enough to sustain it. It's a perfect alignment of conditions that doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it creates exactly what we're about to see, a major multi-day snowstorm. Now you understand the how and why. You understand the mechanics of what's creating this system. You understand why it's not just a passing shower, but a persistent storm that lasts 2 full days. The science isn't complicated once you break it down into simple pieces. Warm air meets cold air, moisture rises and cools, precipitation falls as snow instead of rain. and the cold air keeps that snow falling and accumulating for hours on end. But understanding how it forms is only part of the story. Now we need to talk about where it strikes, because this storm isn't hitting the entire UK uniformly. It's following a path. It's affecting specific regions more than others, and knowing which areas are going to see the heaviest snow helps complete the picture of what this weekend really looks like. So let's map this out together and see exactly where this storm is going to hit hardest. Now that you understand how this storm forms, let's talk about where it's actually going to hit. Because weather doesn't affect everywhere equally. Some areas are going to see the full force of this system, others might catch the edge of it. And understanding that geographic pattern helps you see the complete picture of what this weekend means for Britain. The storm's entry point starts over the western portions of the country. That's where the moisture-laden air first encounters the cold air that's been settling in from the north. Western England begins to see the transition from rain to snow first, usually during Saturday night into the early hours of Sunday morning. This is where the transformation happens, where liquid becomes solid, where the character of the storm reveals itself. From there, the system spreads eastward, but not quickly. This isn't a fast-moving line of storms that races across the country in a few hours. This is a slow, methodical spread that takes time to cover ground. By Sunday morning, the snow is falling across a broad swathe of central England. By Sunday afternoon, eastern areas are seeing it too, and through all of this, the western areas that got it first are still getting it. That's the persistent nature of this system showing itself. The 16 counties in the path of this storm form a corridor that runs roughly from north to south through England. I'm not going to list every single county by name because that becomes tedious and isn't necessary for understanding the bigger picture. What matters is the scope. We're talking about a significant portion of the country experiencing the same weather event simultaneously. Major population centres are included, rural communities are included, urban areas with millions of residents are included. This touches a lot of lives. Some areas are forecast to see heavier accumulation than others, and that comes down to a few factors. Elevation plays a role. Higher ground tends to see more snow simply because it's colder up there, and the snow falls more efficiently. But even at lower elevations, the persistent nature of this storm means accumulation is going to be significant across the board. You don't need to be in the hills to see several inches of snow when the system keeps dropping it hour after hour. The eastern portions of England, particularly areas that don't always see heavy snow during winter, are going to find themselves dealing with conditions they might not be entirely prepared for. When you live in a region that gets occasional snow but not regular blizzards, your infrastructure reflects that. The number of snowplows available, the amount of salt stored for roads, the general readiness of the system, it's all calibrated for occasional winter weather, not multi-day storms. So when a system like this rolls through, it challenges resources in ways that more frequent snow wouldn't. Central England is forecast to be in this system's main path, where snow may be most persistent and accumulation could be highest. These are the areas where Sunday morning brings snow, Sunday afternoon brings more snow, Sunday night brings even more snow, and Monday morning continues the pattern. The relentless nature of it becomes the defining characteristic. Northern areas of England and parts of Scotland catching the southern edge of this system are going to see their own version of this storm, though the specifics might differ slightly. The overall pattern remains the same, persistent snowfall over a multi-day period, but the exact timing of when it arrives and how long it lasts can vary by region. The storm is large enough that it affects a massive area, but within that area there are subtle differences in intensity and duration. What's particularly striking about this geographic spread is how it connects communities that don't normally experience the exact same weather at the exact same time. A snowstorm affecting 16 counties means people separated by hundreds of miles are all looking out their windows Sunday morning and seeing the same thing. Snow falling heavily, landscapes turning white, visibility dropping during the heaviest bands. There's something unifying about that, even as it creates challenges. The urban-rural divide matters less with a storm like this than you might think. Cities certainly have more resources for dealing with snow, more equipment, more personnel, more infrastructure dedicated to keeping roads passable. But when snow is falling continuously across such a large area, even cities with good snow removal systems find themselves working constantly just to keep up. The snow isn't giving them time to clear one street before it needs clearing again. Rural areas face the same challenge with fewer resources. The storm doesn't discriminate. There's also the question of what happens at the edges of this system. The 16 counties in the main path are going to see the heaviest, most persistent snow, But weather systems don't have sharp borders. Areas just outside that main corridor might see lighter snow, or they might see the rain to snow transition happen later and less completely. They're not off the hook entirely. They're just dealing with a slightly less intense version of the same system. The storm is big enough that its influence extends beyond just those 16 counties. One thing worth noting is that this isn't a storm that moves through and hits different areas at wildly different times. Yes, western regions see it before eastern regions. But we're talking about differences of hours, not days. By the time Sunday afternoon rolls around, pretty much everyone in the path of this storm is experiencing it simultaneously. That simultaneous experience means the impacts are happening everywhere at once, which stretches resources and creates a collective challenge rather than a region-by-region problem. The geography of this storm matters because it determines who's directly affected and who's watching from the sidelines. If you're in one of those 16 counties, this is your weather story for the weekend. If you're just outside that zone, you're close enough to understand what your neighbours are dealing with, but far enough away that your own experience might be considerably milder. And if you're elsewhere in the UK entirely, you're watching a major weather event unfold across a significant portion of your country. So now you know where this storm is going to hit. You can picture the corridor it's following, the regions it's affecting, the scale of the geographic area involved. You understand that this isn't a localized event hitting one city or one county. This is a broad, regional storm affecting millions of people across a huge section of England. That's the geographic story. That's the map of what this weekend looks like from above. But understanding the geography is only valuable if you also understand what actually happens when this storm arrives. So now we need to shift from where to what. What does it actually look like on the ground when a 2-day blizzard sets up over your region? What's the experience of living through this kind of persistent snowfall? That's what we're diving into next. The reality of what happens during the storm itself. Let's talk about what it actually feels like when a 2-day snowstorm arrives, because all the forecasts and maps and meteorological explanations in the world don't quite capture the reality of living through something like this. So I want you to imagine Sunday morning. Better yet, let me walk you through it hour by hour so you understand why this storm's persistence is what makes it significant. And Sunday morning begins differently than Saturday morning ended. Saturday you might have seen rain, you might have gone about your day normally, running errands, spending time with family, doing whatever Saturdays usually hold. The rain was there, but rain is manageable, rain is familiar. By Saturday evening, maybe you noticed the temperature dropping. Maybe you heard the forecast warning that the rain would transition to snow overnight, and maybe you thought, all right, we'll see what Sunday brings. Sunday morning brings the forecasted conditions. You wake up and look outside and everything has changed. The rain from yesterday is gone, replaced by snow, not a light dusting, not a few flakes drifting down lazily, real snow, steady snow, the kind that's already accumulated on every surface and shows no sign of stopping. Your car is white. Your garden is white. The street is white, and snowfall is expected to continue. That's the first thing you notice, the transformation. The world looks different under snow, softer somehow, quieter. The snow absorbs sound in a way rain doesn't. But that softness is deceptive, because what you're looking at isn't a brief snow shower that will taper off by mid-morning. What you're looking at is the beginning of hours and hours of continuous snowfall. As Sunday morning progresses, the snow keeps falling. You watch it accumulate. An inch becomes 2 inches, becomes 3. If you measured it every hour, you'd see the total climbing steadily. That's what persistent snowfall does. It adds up. Each hour contributes to the total, and over the course of a full day, those hourly contributions become significant accumulation. Visibility becomes an issue during the heavier bands of snowfall. You know those moments when it's snowing so heavily that you can barely see across the street. Those moments happen multiple times throughout Sunday. The snow intensifies, then eases slightly, then intensifies again. It's not uniform. Weather never is. There are pulses of heavier snow embedded within the broader steady snowfall. Those pulses are when you really see the blizzard conditions emerge. By Sunday afternoon, the accumulation is undeniable. Accumulation at this point is significant. This represents significant accumulation. This is the kind of snow depth that changes how you move through the world. Walking through it requires effort. Driving through it, if you're attempting to drive at all, requires caution and slow speeds. The landscape changes to a winter scene less common in mild British winters, and here's the thing, it's not stopping. That's what sets this apart. A typical snow event might give you a few hours of moderate snowfall and then move on. You deal with the accumulation from those few hours, and then it's over. But Sunday afternoon doesn't bring an end to the snow. Sunday afternoon is still in the middle of it. The storm is still overhead. The cold air is still at the surface. The moisture is still being pushed upward and converted into snowflakes. The storm system continues. Sunday evening arrives, and the snow continues. By now, people have been watching it fall for 10-12 hours. The totals are climbing toward the higher end of what was forecast. In the hardest hit areas, we're approaching that 10 centimetre mark. That's enough snow that it's not just an inconvenience anymore. It's a genuine challenge to navigate. It's enough snow that it requires shoveling, requires clearing, requires active management if you want to maintain any sense of normal access to your property. But you can't clear it completely because it's still falling. This is characteristic of slow-moving systems. You could go out and shovel your walk Sunday afternoon, and by Sunday evening it needs shoveling again. The work is never quite finished because the snow is never quite finished falling. It's steady and ongoing over many hours. Sunday night could bring some of the heavier snowfall based on typical storm patterns. Overnight intensification is common with winter storms. The atmospheric dynamics shift slightly, the moisture transport becomes more efficient, and the snow comes down even harder than it did during the day. So while people are sleeping, the storm continues producing snowfall, adding substantially to the accumulation totals that were already significant by sunset. Monday morning may bring additional accumulation from overnight snowfall. You already dealt with 12+ hours of snowfall on Sunday. You watched it accumulate throughout the day. You saw the totals climb, and now Monday morning reveals that the overnight hours added even more. Snow depths will likely have increased overnight, and the snow is still falling. Monday morning isn't the end. This is an important point. The storm doesn't politely wrap up Sunday night so Monday can start fresh. Monday morning is still part of the impact window. The snow is still coming down. The accumulation is still building. People who need to start their work week are facing conditions that make that extremely difficult, if not impossible in some areas. This is what a 2-day snowstorm looks like from the inside. It's not dramatic in the way a violent thunderstorm is dramatic, with lightning and thunder and sudden bursts of intensity. It's dramatic in its steadiness. It's dramatic in the way it just keeps going, hour after hour, through day into night into day again. The challenge comes from the extended duration, in the way it doesn't give you a break to catch up. The visibility issues continue throughout Monday morning. Heavy bands of snow create those reduced visibility periodically. Between the heavy bands, the snow might ease to a moderate fall, but it never stops completely. That's the signature of this system. Snowfall continues with varying intensity. It's always adding to the total. There's no pause where you can say, all right, we're through the worst of it. Not until the system finally moves on. And the impact of all this isn't just about the snow itself. It's about what the snow prevents. It's about the activities that can't happen, the travel that can't take place, the normal rhythms of life that get suspended when you're buried under continuous snowfall for 2 days. Sunday becomes a day spent indoors watching the storm. Monday becomes a day of assessing what the storm left behind and figuring out how to deal with it. By the time Monday afternoon arrives and the snow finally begins to taper off, the landscape has been completely transformed. We're talking about significant accumulation across 16 counties. We're talking about snow depths that don't happen regularly in Britain. We're talking about a layer of white covering everything, burying familiar landmarks, creating a winter scene that will take days to fully clear. But here's what most weather forecasts don't tell you. The snow stopping doesn't mean the story ends. That's when people breathe a sigh of relief and think, okay, it's over. And in one sense, it is. The active snowfall phase is ending. But in another sense, the real challenge is just beginning. Because now you're left with the aftermath. Now you're dealing with what the storm left behind. And that's where the chaos for days part of this story comes in. The snow stops falling Monday afternoon. But the impacts of that snow extend well beyond Monday, and that's exactly what we need to talk about next. The snow stops falling Monday afternoon, the clouds begin to break up, maybe you even see some sunshine pushing through, and there's this moment where people think, all right, we made it through, back to normal. Except nothing is back to normal, not yet. Recovery will take time. This is where the extended recovery period becomes clear. Let me explain what the aftermath actually means with a storm of this magnitude. You've got up to 10 centimetres of snow sitting on the ground across 16 counties. This means significant roadway coverage requiring extensive clearing efforts. That's every driveway, every sidewalk, every car park, every pathway buried under snow that accumulated over 2 full days, and all of that snow needs to go somewhere or be managed somehow before life can return to anything resembling normal. Start with the roads. Major highways get priority attention from snow clearing crews. Those are the arteries of transportation, the routes that need to be passable for emergency vehicles and essential services. So crews work on those first. But even with priority attention, clearing snow takes time. You can't just wave a wand and make it disappear. Plows have to make multiple passes, salt has to be spread, snow has to be pushed to the sides of the road, and all of that happens at a certain pace that can't be rushed beyond the physical limits of equipment and personnel. Secondary roads take longer. Residential streets take even longer than that. Rural roads with limited snow clearing resources may experience delays in clearing. When a storm drops this much snow across such a large area all at once, the sheer volume of work required to clear it all exceeds the immediate capacity of most local governments. They work continuously, around the clock, but the backlog of streets needing attention is enormous. Tuesday morning arrives. That's now 2 full days after the snow started Sunday morning, and many areas are still dealing with uncleared streets. Schools that were closed on Monday remain closed Tuesday because buses can't safely navigate residential areas. Businesses that shut down during the storm are still trying to assess when they can reopen. People who need to get to work are figuring out whether their commute is even possible yet. The snow itself doesn't disappear quickly either. When you get this much accumulation all at once and when temperatures remain cold after the storm passes, that snow sticks around. It might start melting slowly in areas that see sunshine, but the melting process is gradual. Shaded areas, spots that don't get direct sun, places where snow was piled especially deep. Those locations hold onto their snow for days. The landscape stays white long after the storm itself has moved on. There's also the issue of refreezing. As temperatures fluctuate in the days following the storm, any melting that happens during slightly warmer moments can refreeze overnight when temperatures drop again. This creates ice, black ice on roads that looks like wet pavement but is actually a skating rink. Ice on walkways that becomes a hazard for anyone trying to get around on foot. The snow itself was the first challenge. The ice that forms afterward is the second challenge. Wednesday rolls around. Now we're 4 days past when this storm began, and there are still lingering impacts. Smaller communities that got buried under the heavier snow are still digging out. Older residents who can't physically clear their own properties are waiting for help to arrive. Side streets in cities are passable but not completely clear. Piles of snow pushed to the sides of roads create narrow passages that make driving more difficult than usual. Life is starting to return to something closer to normal, but we're not there yet. The economic impact of this extended disruption adds up quickly. Businesses that were closed for 2 or 3 days lose revenue. Workers who couldn't get to their jobs lose wages. Delivery services that couldn't operate during and immediately after the storm create backlogs of packages and goods that need to catch up. The ripple effects of a multi-day shutdown spread through the economy in ways that aren't always immediately visible but are definitely felt. Schools face their own challenges in the aftermath. Even when roads are cleared enough for buses to run, schools have to clear their own parking areas, walkways and entrances. They have to ensure buildings are safe and functioning properly after being shut down during the cold snap. Some schools might reopen Tuesday, others Wednesday, some possibly not until Thursday. Each closure day creates a ripple effect for parents who need childcare, for students who miss instruction, for the overall rhythm of the school year. There's also the physical toll on people who are doing the clearing work. Whether it's professional crews working long shifts to clear public roads, or individuals shoveling their own driveways and walks, the work is exhausting. Shoveling heavy snow for hours is physically demanding. Doing it repeatedly over multiple days as new snow needs clearing, or as previously cleared areas need re-clearing, leads to fatigue and sometimes injury. The human cost of managing this much snow accumulation is real. The weather in the days following the storm matters too. If temperatures warm up significantly, the melting process accelerates and the snow disappears faster. But if temperatures stay cold, that snow remains on the ground for a week or more. Britain's February weather is unpredictable. Some years it's relatively mild. Other years it stays cold deep into the month. How quickly the aftermath resolves depends partly on what the weather does after the storm passes, and then there's the question of what happens if another weather system moves through before the aftermath of this one is fully resolved. If you're still dealing with snow on the ground from this weekend's storm and another system brings more precipitation later in the week, that compounds the problem. Fortunately, the forecast beyond this immediate storm doesn't show another major system right on its heels, but the possibility always exists during winter. Recovery typically takes several days, with conditions gradually improving through the week. Roads are clear, snow has melted or been removed, schools are open, businesses are operating, people are back to their regular routines. The landscape might still show some remnants of the storm in shaded areas or in large piles where snow was stacked during clearing operations, but active disruption has largely ended. That's the timeline we're looking at. Sunday and Monday, the storm itself. Tuesday and Wednesday, intensive clearing and recovery efforts. Thursday and Friday, gradual return to normal. Maybe into the following weekend before everything is truly back to the way it was before the storm arrived. That's what chaos for days actually means. It doesn't mean panic or disaster, it means extended disruption. It means a week where normal life is interrupted and requires active effort to restore. The title of this video promised you that chaos would continue for days after the storm, and now you understand why that's an accurate description. The snowfall itself is only part of the story. What happens after the snow stops, the clearing, the melting, the recovery, the gradual restoration of normal activity, takes time, days of time, and that's the reality of a major winter storm. The event itself might last 2 days, but its echoes last a week. So now you have the complete picture. You understand how the storm forms, where it hits, what it feels like during the active snowfall, and why the aftermath extends well beyond the snow stopping. That's the full story from beginning to end. And that brings us to one final question. What does all of this really mean? So here we are at the end of this journey through a major winter storm. We started with a simple statement. A major snowstorm will hit the UK this weekend, and the effects will continue for days. And over the past several minutes, we've explored exactly what that means, not through speculation or sensationalism, but through a straightforward look at the meteorology, the geography, the timeline, and the aftermath of a significant weather event. This storm matters because it's persistent. That's the word I keep coming back to. Persistent. It doesn't blow through quickly. It doesn't give you a few hours of snow and move on. It sets up over Britain and stays there, dropping snow continuously for 2 full days. And that persistence is what creates accumulation significant enough to disrupt normal life across 16 counties. The science behind it is surprisingly simple once you break it down. Warm, moist air meets cold, dense air. The moisture rises and cools. Precipitation forms and falls through air cold enough to turn it to snow rather than rain. And because the atmospheric setup remains stable for an extended period, that process keeps repeating itself hour after hour. There's nothing mysterious about it. It's just the way weather works when conditions align in a particular way. The geographic scope is what makes this a regional event rather than a local one. Millions of people are going to experience this storm simultaneously, from Sunday morning when it begins through Monday afternoon when it finally tapers off. Those 16 counties are all dealing with the same weather. That shared experience creates its own story, its own collective moment that people will remember and talk about. The impact during the storm is real but manageable if you understand what you're dealing with. This isn't a surprise. The forecast has been clear. The timing is known. If you're in the path of this storm, you know it's coming this weekend. That knowledge allows for preparation, for adjustment of plans, for making sure you're ready to spend Sunday and Monday dealing with continuous snowfall. There's no reason to panic, but there's every reason to take it seriously. The aftermath is where patience becomes important. The snow stops Monday afternoon, but the recovery takes the rest of the week. Roads need clearing. Snow needs removing or melting. Life needs to gradually return to normal. That doesn't happen instantly. It takes days. And understanding that timeline helps set realistic expectations for when things will truly be back to the way they were before the storm. This weekend represents one of those weather events that reminds us winter still has power. Britain doesn't see storms like this constantly. They're not everyday occurrences, but when they do happen, they demand attention and respect. They disrupt routines, they create challenges, and they also create moments where communities come together to help each other through difficult conditions. If you're watching this from outside the path of the storm, you've gotten an in-depth look at what your fellow Britons are about to experience. If you're watching from inside one of those 16 counties, you now understand the full scope of what's coming. Not just the snow itself, but the entire arc from Saturday through the following week. Either way, you're informed, you're prepared, you understand what this weekend means. Weather like this reminds us that we're still subject to natural forces we can't control. We can predict them, understand them, prepare for them, but we can't stop them. A storm forms when the atmosphere decides conditions are right, and then we deal with what it brings. That's been true throughout human history, and it remains true today even with all our technology and infrastructure. So as we head into this weekend, keep an eye on the forecast. Watch how the storm develops. Pay attention to the snow accumulation in your area or in the areas affected, and remember that while the snow will eventually stop and the aftermath will eventually resolve, this is a significant weather event that deserves your attention and respect. If you found this explanation valuable, if understanding the full story of this storm from formation to aftermath helped you make sense of what's coming, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe and hit the notification bell. Weather events like this don't happen constantly, but when they do, I'll be here breaking them down in detail so you're never caught off guard. And I read every comment, so let me know your thoughts on this storm and whether you're in its path. Stay safe this weekend, stay informed, and remember, it's not just about surviving the storm itself, but understanding the days that follow. That's the complete story, and now you know it all.